students. Welcome to our video lecture series on perspectives on performativity. So after this video lecture series, our objective is that you will be able to define and nuance the term performativity through various theories and perspectives that I'm going to introduce to you. So I'm going to upload in our Google Drive some of the foundational readings and articles from the theorists that we're going to discuss. And if you're aiming to do a deeper study on these theories, you are free to read them, and they may be beneficial in your future research projects and maybe in your undergraduate thesis in a few years. So make sure that you skim them and you keep them in your files because they might come in handy someday. All right, so let's begin with our discussion on perspectives on performativity. All righty. So before we head on to the theories that we will be discussing, here is a question that I have for you. When you hear the word performative, are you thinking of an adjective or a noun? Is performative an adjective or a noun? What do you think? Well, my answer is performative as a term can be used both as an adjective and a noun. So performative is used as an adjective if you are describing a certain act as having performance-like qualities. So for example, you're talking about a dance routine of an indigenous performance. You're going to talk about this dance routine as performative because it can be performed. It can be repeated. The behaviors, the embodiedness, okay, of the steps can be repeated, okay, by performers. So that is the adjective definition or the adjective perspective on the term performative. But can it be a noun? It can be a noun, and the theories that we're going to discuss in a few more seconds will prove that, okay, a performative is also a speech act, right? So a performative is also a rhetorical utterance in a social drama, and they don't have to be confined to qualities of a specific performance, but they can be utterances or performances themselves that can alter the stage of reality. Okay, so we will be talking about that later. Now, let's move on to the first perspective of performativity that we're going to tackle in this series. We're going to talk about performativity as mimesis or imitation. So there will be three perspectives that we're going to discuss in this series. The first is mimesis, the second is poiesis, and the third is kinesis. Okay, so let's start with mimesis or mimesis. Okay, so here we're going to focus on Erving Goffman's foundational theory in the field of speech communication and performance studies. So I hope that you watched the link that I gave you. Dr. Lambert from Northwestern University hosts How Communication Works on YouTube, and he talked about Erving Goffman's theory or article titled The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Okay, so make sure that you've watched it, but here is a brief summary of the theory. So according to Erving Goffman, parts of our social life are staged. So here we're talking about everyday life performances, as in pagkagising nyo or when you post something on social media, the dramas that we see in politics, specifically how the government is dealing with COVID-19, etc., etc. These are all performances. So this theory talks about how we as people have different social roles that we enact. Okay, we have different identities that we try to act out. So for example, right now I'm doing a performance during this lecture because I'm setting my own stage. I'm setting my online stage. I have here what do you call that? The ring light, and I have a camera in front of me. And what role am I performing right now? I'm performing the role of your instructor, and you are my audiences in this performance. And I have props in my performance like this presentation, Prezi video, okay, to show you some slides. So basically, that is one of the examples of Erving Goffman's presentation of self and everyday life. But I'm not just an instructor. I'm also a daughter. I'm also a Christian. I'm also a girlfriend. Okay, so I have a lot of roles that I have to play in life. And I have descriptions of how these roles must be played. How should a daughter be like, in Filipino context? And I try to perform, okay, that specific script. What are the expectations from a DSCTA instructor? And I try to, perform those roles. So that is another example of Erving Goffman's presentation of self in everyday life. So we have this concept of ourself, we have a concept of a social role that we need to play, and we have audiences that we aim to interact with through that performance. We have audiences that we want to sway in our performances. Now, in this specific theory, Goffman suggested that we have front stage and backstage boundaries. Meaning, just like in a theater production, kapag nasa front stage ka, you are really performing a piece of literature, you are performing a different character, and if you're performing in one production and another production, you can be performing different characters in front of different audiences. And according to Goffman, it's the same with our social life. Okay, we also have this backstage boundary, the intrapersonal confinement na hindi natin usually pinapakita sa iba publicly. Okay, that's why a lot of undergraduate thesis in speech communication use this theory when discussing or analyzing phenomenon like closeted gay men. Okay, what is the front stage that they're performing in front of their family, and the backstage that they only perform with themselves and with the presence of their friends. Okay, there's also this undergraduate speech communication thesis on alter egos. So your online self versus your offline self, and how expression and gender identity is also being performed. So again, if you're interested in using Goffman's theory in your future research projects, go read the article that I uploaded in our Google Drive. Okay, but the thing is, since Goffman presented a front stage and a backstage conception of social life, we're talking about a binary between reality and appearance. Okay, so when we talk about front stage, we're just performing things. Okay, it's just an appearance. But there's this backstage that we don't really show, or that we don't give to everyone publicly. Okay, na nagre-reflect sa reality. Okay, so in this specific theory, there is this conception of real and fake. What is reality and what is being performed. Okay, so that's why it's called mimesis. Okay, so we are like an imitation of a theater production. It's like an imitation of a play. There is the stage, which is about, just performing characters who are not really you. And there's this backstage where you are yourself. Okay, so it talks about performances as an imitation of reality. And there is this clear boundary between the two. So aside from those things, I'm going to show you an example of how Erving Goffman's presentation of self in everyday life can be analyzed. So my example is performative allyship. So if you have read that article that I included in your module, I know you will like it. In some ways, you can relate to it. You can even write a paper on it if you have observed yourself as guilty of it, or maybe a lot of people nowadays. So performative allyship is when you try to perform being an ally of the oppressed and marginalized sectors through overt performances in social media, or by attending a concert, or by buying merchandise that support these specific advocacies. But in real life, without the use of these overt performances, you're not really doing a consistent, committed act of trying to fight injustice and understand the suffering of the other. So here we can see that Erving Goffman's theorization of the presentation of everyday life can be applied. So according to Goffman, a performance may be defined as all the activity of a given participant on a given occasion which serves to influence in any way any of the other participants. So that is actually an acceptable definition of performance. So if you are interested in applying Goffman, you can see a lot of communicative acts, okay? A lot of rhetorical acts that fall under this definition of performance. And according to Goffman also, an act is composed of performers, audiences, and observers. So it's very like a theater production, right? It's very like a play. No, may performers and merong audiences, and there's also spectators. You can also be a spectator of your own performance. But according to Goffman, when we perform social life and when we perform ourselves, we do an enactment of the rights and duties attached to social roles or performances of identity. So again, we have this script of what is a perfect daughter, what's a perfect citizen is like, and we try to perform and embody these roles to behaviors that can be repeated and can be cited. Okay, so an example is Black Lives Matter. So how is this related to performative allyship? Okay, so Black Lives Matter is a hashtag. So maybe you have also used this in your Twitter, Facebook accounts. You show solidarity with our African American brothers and sisters in the United States. So, nagsusuot kayo ng mga t-shirts na may hashtag Black Lives Matter, or nagpo-post kayo ng mga rants nyo on Twitter about this, and your very deep and nuanced rhetorical analysis on the Black Lives Matter movement in the US. So, according to Goffman, if you're going to look at it using the front stage and backstage, so when a performance, it can be a social media post, is posted publicly in front of an audience, nakikita na natin siya as performative. Okay? And here in this performance, you're trying to show that this particular issue deserves attention, and that aside from that, of course, you are a person who is opinionated and you know the ins and outs of this specific issue. Okay, so in what ways does that become performative allyship? It becomes performative allyship when your allyship ends in that specific overt performance. If everything is only in the front stage, and in the backstage, your commitment and your sustained care and empathy for the suffering of others are not seen in your own personal sacrifices and involvement in their specific situations. So, for example, ang dami daw mga Americans who post hashtag Black Lives Matter, but when it comes to, the actual important personal sacrifices, like donating to an organization that can help the cause, or voting for the leaders who will really push for policies that can support the lives of African American people hindi nila nagagawa. So everything is just for a show on social media when they post hashtag BLM. And who really are their audiences? Their audiences are not people in power, okay? Where you give these messages to para ang public policy ay mag-change, okay? Sometimes people do post hashtag Black Lives Matter and this hashtag Iha Ako, okay? Sometimes not just to support the advocacy, but to show their peers that, you know, I'm one of you guys. I understand you. I belong with you. Okay? So if it ends only on social media and there's no sustained commitment, you know, and there's no sustained desire to learn more about these kinds of social issues, it becomes performative allyship. Okay, so another example is hashtag pray for. I actually have a paper that will be published very soon. So I looked at the hashtag pray for Marawi phenomenon. It's interesting that a lot of Filipinos, not just Filipinos, but also foreigners from all over the world hashtagged that specific hashtag pray for Marawi during the first few weeks and months of the Marawi siege. Okay, so meaning people try to express their concern, their solidarity with the suffering of others by posting a hashtag. But here's a clarification. When you post hashtag pray for, that is different from praying. Okay, because when you post that you are hashtag praying for, you're announcing that you're praying. So praying as an act is different from the front stage of announcing that you're praying. And I saw that most people, when they hashtag pray for, okay, it's not only a sign of, you know, caring for the other, but also an acceptance of the fact that they cannot do anything for the suffering of the other. Okay, so they use this hashtag as a mutual forgiveness that, okay, we cannot do anything but just to, you know, show our solidarity with the others through religious references. Okay? But the thing is, interestingly, after a few weeks and after a month of this being the trending hashtag on Twitter, nawalan na ng buzz para sa mga displaced residents of Marawi. Kahit hanggang ngayon, marami pa ring displaced residents. So, ibig sabihin, yung bang pinakita natin na performances of solidarity through this hashtag Pray for Marawi noon ay nasa front stage lamang. At ngayon, na ang dami pa ring mga injustices sa part ng mga displaced residents. Hindi sila kasama sa mga plano kung paano bubuing muli ang Marawi ay nasa ng ating commitment? Nasa ng ating mga backstage performances? Do we still seek accountability? Do we still give focus on this specific issue? So, wala. So, I think Erving Goffman's theory of front stage and backstage can be one lens to understand performative allyship. Alrighty? So again, performative allyship is an example of the presentation of self in everyday life where there is a demarcation between front stage and backstage. Social roles are being enacted and there is an imitation of performances as a way of explaining reality. Now, for our synchronous session, here is your assignment. What do you think are the disadvantages of a mimetic view on performativity? Okay, so I would love to hear a lot of opinions and comments on this. And I'm looking forward to our synchronous meeting so I can hear your suggestions and your answers. Okay, now let's move on to the next perspective of performativity, which is poiesis or construction.